Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Louisiana. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The plantation stood like a white monument against the dark green of the Louisiana swamplands, just 15 miles east of Baton Rouge. In 1847, the Whitaker estate was considered among the most productive sugar plantations in East Baton Rouge Parish. Records from the Louisiana State Archives describe it as a property of considerable means, extending nearly 800 acres from the Mississippi River eastward. What made the Whitaker plantation different from others wasn't its size or production, but rather what happened inside the main house, specifically in the attic room with the small circular window that faced west toward the river. The first official record of Ruth Whitaker appears in the parish census of 1837. According to documents preserved in the Louisiana Historical Society, she was listed as female child, aged 10 years, residing at Whitaker Plantation. 10 years later, when census takers returned in 1847, Ruth Whitaker was again recorded as female, aged 10 years. The census taker made a notation in the margin, possible clerical error from previous census. But this was no clerical error. What followed would become one of the most disturbing mysteries in Louisiana's pre-Civil War history, one that was deliberately buried for more than a century. Josephine Blanchard, whose grandmother worked in the Whitaker house as a domestic servant, provided a rare oral history to Baton Rouge University researchers in 1962. "My grandmother would never speak of the Whitaker girl except late at night, and even then she would whisper. She said the girl never grew. Not 1 inch, not 1 day. They kept her in the attic room, away from visitors, but everyone knew, everyone who worked there knew." The Whitaker family had arrived in Louisiana from Massachusetts in 1828, purchasing land along the Mississippi River during Louisiana's sugar boom. The family consisted of Bradford Whitaker, his wife Eleanor, and their 3 sons. There was no mention of a daughter in their immigration documents. According to records from the port of New Orleans, the family arrived with 6 trunks, 3 cases of books, a pianoforte, and household goods. The first mention of Ruth doesn't appear until 9 years after their arrival. County property records show that in 1840, Bradford Whitaker commissioned significant renovations to the main house, including what architectural plans referred to as a special room with enhanced privacy features. Local laborers who worked on the construction later reported that the room had unusual specifications: walls lined with cork for soundproofing, a separate ventilation system, and a door with 3 separate locks, all opening from the outside. What happened within the Whitaker plantation walls remained largely unrecorded, as was common in private households of that era. However, fragments emerged through household records, correspondence, and accounts from those who worked at the property. The plantation employed approximately 70 enslaved people for field work, with 6 house servants who worked within the main residence. Of these 6, only 2 were ever permitted to enter the attic room: a woman named Sarah and a man referred to in household accounts only as Thomas the Elder. A letter found in the personal effects of Dr. James Merritt, the Whitaker family physician, provides rare insight. The letter, dated April 3, 1843, was never sent, but was preserved among Merritt's papers donated to the Louisiana Medical Historical Society in 1961. In it, Dr. Merritt wrote to a colleague at Harvard Medical School, "I find myself confronted with a case that defies all medical understanding. The child, now in her 15th year according to her parents, presents physically as no more than 10 years of age. She has shown no signs of maturation appropriate to her age. Her height remains 49 inches, unchanged these past 4 years of my observation. Most perplexing is that even minor wounds and abrasions heal with remarkable rapidity, often within hours. I have considered glandular disorders, but nothing in medical literature describes such a complete cessation of growth. The parents resist any suggestion of consulting specialists or documenting the case formally. I find myself in an ethical quandary that keeps me awake most nights. The Whitakers were prominent in local society, attending church regularly and hosting seasonal gatherings for neighboring plantation owners. Bradford Whitaker served on the parish council and was known as a shrewd businessman who continually expanded his holdings. Eleanor Whitaker was active in the Ladies' Auxiliary of the First Episcopal Church of Baton Rouge. Yet despite their social standing, visitors to the home consistently noted that the family was intensely private. One guest, Harriet Lowfield, wrote in her diary after attending a Christmas dinner in 1845, "The Whitakers maintain a beautiful home, but there are rooms one is clearly not meant to approach." When I became disoriented looking for the powder room and ascended the wrong staircase, Mr. Whitaker appeared so suddenly and with such alarm that I was quite startled. He explained certain areas were undergoing repairs and were unsafe. Throughout dinner I noticed the servants casting glances toward the ceiling whenever the house settled or creaked, as old houses do. In the summer of 1846, a significant event occurred that was documented in multiple sources. The Whitaker house caught fire, apparently starting in the kitchen during a thunderstorm. The Baton Rouge Weekly Gazette reported, "Flames engulfed the rear portion of one of our parish's finest homes. Prompt action by neighbors and slaves prevented the fire from consuming the entire structure." What the newspaper didn't report was what multiple witnesses later described: Bradford Whitaker rushing into the burning house and emerging from the smoke carrying what appeared to be a child wrapped in blankets. He placed this bundle in a carriage and immediately departed toward Baton Rouge while the house was still burning. Thomas LeBlanc, whose ancestors owned the neighboring plantation, recounted in a 1965 oral history, "My great-grandfather was among those who helped fight the fire. He told his children, and they told us, that Whitaker cared nothing for the flames or his possessions. He ran straight to the attic stairs, disappeared for minutes while everyone thought he would perish, then emerged with someone small in his arms. He spoke to no one, acknowledged no one, just placed his bundle in a carriage and left. He didn't return until the next day, though his house still smoldered." Parish records show that 2 days after the fire, Bradford Whitaker withdrew the considerable sum of $800 from the Merchants' Bank of Baton Rouge. The following week, he engaged in correspondence with a Dr. Elias Humphrey of New Orleans, a physician known for treating unusual cases and researching tropical diseases. No records exist of any consultation, but Dr. Humphrey's financial ledgers, preserved in the New Orleans Medical Archives, show a payment of $700 from Bradford Whitaker on July 18, 1846, an enormous sum for medical services at that time. Following the fire, the Whitakers became even more reclusive. They declined most social invitations and made renovations to the damaged house that included an entirely new wing, separate from the main structure but connected by a covered walkway. Architectural plans filed with the parish referred to it as a private family annex. During this period, an unusual number of workers left the Whitaker household service. Parish employment records, which tracked the movement of free workers between properties, show that between August 1846 and February 1847, 4 house servants left the Whitaker employment. This was remarkable for the time, as such positions were highly sought after. One of these servants, a free woman of color named Marie Laveau, not to be confused with the famous New Orleans voodoo practitioner of the same name, later relocated to Natchez, Mississippi. In 1868, she gave an account to a traveling journalist that was published in the obscure journal American Peculiarities. The Whitaker house held secrets that no God-fearing person should witness. I worked there for 7 years until what I saw became too much for my conscience to bear. There was a child who was no child. I am not educated, but I know the natural order of things. Children grow, seasons change, the river rises and falls. But in that house was something that defied nature itself. They called her Ruth and claimed she was their niece from Boston, but she had been there for years, never changing, never growing. The mistress would trim her hair each month exactly 1 inch, keeping it always the same length. The master would measure her height against a notch in the doorframe, always frowning at the result. The child, if that's what she was, spoke rarely, and when she did, her voice held the knowledge of years. Her body didn't show. I left after the fire, when they brought her back different. Her eyes had changed. Before, they held sadness. After, they held nothing at all. In February 1847, the tranquility of the Whitaker plantation was disturbed by a visit from Dr. Samuel Cartwright, a prominent New Orleans physician known for his controversial theories on race and medicine. Though no formal record exists of his visit, his personal journal, which was donated to Tulane University in 1959, contains a cryptic entry. Traveled to Baton Rouge at the insistent request of B.W. to observe the remarkable case he shelters. I have seen it with my own eyes and still cannot trust what I witnessed. If genuine, it represents either the most significant medical anomaly of our century or something I hesitate to name. The child's blood under my microscope revealed structures I have never encountered in human tissue. When pricked with a needle, the wound closed before my eyes. Most disturbing was her affect. She observed me not as a child observes an adult, but as a creature might observe a specimen. I departed with samples, but doubt I will return. Some mysteries, perhaps, are warnings rather than invitations to discovery. The winter of 1847 brought unusually cold weather to Louisiana. The Mississippi River froze along its banks for the first time in living memory, and many plantation crops suffered. It was during this bitter cold spell, in late February, that the incident occurred, which would finally bring unwanted attention to the Whitakers' carefully guarded secret. According to sheriff's reports preserved in the East Baton Rouge Parish Records Office on the night of February 27th, a plantation worker named John Miller was found dead on the road between the Whitaker plantation and Baton Rouge. The official cause of death was listed as exposure to elements resulting in freezing, but the report contained troubling details. Miller's body was found only 3 miles from the plantation, on a route he knew well. More significantly, he was carrying a burlap sack containing a child's nightgown, a sealed jar of liquid later determined to be preserved blood, and a leather-bound journal. The journal was the personal diary of Eleanor Whitaker. How Miller came to possess it was never determined, but its contents caused enough concern that Sheriff Thomas Beauregard rode to the Whitaker plantation the following day. The diary itself disappeared from evidence shortly thereafter, but Deputy William Hargrove, who accompanied the sheriff, later provided testimony that was recorded in 1869 during a property dispute involving the abandoned Whitaker lands. Mrs. Whitaker's diary contained observations of the girl they called Ruth, daily measurements of her height, weight, and other particulars. Notes about wounds healing, paper cuts, burns, even what appeared to be deliberate cuts, all healing within hours. Most disturbing were the dates, entries spanning from 1838 to 1847, all describing a child who remained exactly the same. The last entry we read before the sheriff stopped me said, R. spoke today of events from 1792 as if she had witnessed them. When pressed, became agitated and broke her water glass, cutting her palm deeply. We measured the healing rate. Complete closure in 40 minutes. He believes we must tell someone soon. I disagree. They would take her from us, or worse, she would not allow it. The sheriff ordered me to wait outside while he spoke privately with Mr. Whitaker. When he returned, his face was ashen. He told me we were leaving and that I was to speak of the diary to no one. The matter was closed. What happened next is documented across multiple sources. On March 3rd, 1847, a fire broke out at the Whitaker plantation. Unlike the previous fire, this one consumed the entire main house and the newly built annex. According to the Baton Rouge Weekly Gazette's March 5th edition, tragedy has visited one of our parish's oldest families. A fire of unknown origin has completely destroyed the Whitaker family home. We regret to report that no members of the household survived the conflagration, which burned with such intensity that neighboring properties were threatened. Bradford Whitaker, his wife Eleanor, and their household were lost in the flames, which witnesses describe as burning with unusual color and ferocity even after water was applied. The fire marshal's report, filed on March 7th, noted, "Fire of unprecedented temperature and resistance to water. Structure completely consumed, with only stone foundation remaining. Human remains recovered indicate 5 adult victims. Cause undetermined but likely accidental in nature due to extreme winter conditions necessitating constant heating of the home." 5 adults were identified: Bradford and Eleanor Whitaker, 2 house servants, and a visiting tutor from New Orleans. No remains of a child were ever officially reported. In the aftermath, the Whitaker properties were sold to satisfy debts that mysteriously appeared against the estate. The land was divided and purchased primarily by neighboring plantation owners. The site of the house itself remained vacant, with local law suggesting the ground was cursed or soured by tragedy. The story of Ruth Whitaker might have remained buried in parish records and local memory, but for a series of unusual incidents that occurred in the decades that followed. In 1863, during the Civil War, Union troops occupying Baton Rouge reported a strange encounter at the former Whitaker property. Lieutenant Josiah Parker of the 6th Michigan Infantry recorded in his official report, "While establishing a forward observation post on the old plantation site east of the city, Private Reynolds encountered what he described as a female child in antiquated dress. Upon approaching, Reynolds reported the child smiled in a manner he found deeply unsettling and then retreated into the underbrush. A search of the area revealed no evidence of habitation or passage. Reynolds was subsequently relieved of duty due to malarial fever, affecting his reliability. In 1871, a survey team mapping properties for post-war tax reassessment documented an unusual discovery at the Whitaker site. Their field notes, preserved in the Louisiana State University archives, state, "Upon clearing the foundation area for measurement, workers unearthed a small chamber beneath what would have been the eastern wing of the house. The brick-lined room, approximately 8 feet square, contained a child's bed, preserved books, and a collection of small jars containing various substances. Most peculiar was a journal written in a childish hand containing entries dated from 1791 to 1847. The survey leader, considering the items nothing more than curious artifacts of the tragic fire that occurred decades earlier, ordered the chamber resealed. The journal was submitted with this report, but appears to have been subsequently removed from the file. The final documented reference to Ruth Whitaker comes from an unexpected source. In 1964, Dr. Lawrence Koenig, a professor of pathology at Johns Hopkins University, published a paper in the Journal of Rare Medical Phenomena titled "Historical Cases of Anomalous Cellular Regeneration." In it, he referenced specimens provided to the university in 1848 by Dr. Samuel Cartwright. Among the curiosities in our medical archives are tissue samples allegedly taken from a Louisiana child in 1847. The samples, preserved in formaldehyde, show cellular structures inconsistent with normal human tissue. Most notably, the cells display patterns of division and regeneration that would be impossible according to our current understanding of human biology. The accompanying notes claim the cells were taken from a subject who had reportedly not aged in over a decade. While such claims are obviously fantastical, the preserved samples themselves remain a legitimate scientific mystery. Modern analysis confirms they are human in origin, yet contain chromosomal structures never documented in any other human tissue sample. The specimens were deemed historical curiosities and consigned to storage in 1938. When requested for this study in 1963, the university was unable to locate them. The swamps and backwaters of Louisiana have long held secrets, some natural, some man-made. The story of Ruth Whitaker, pieced together from fragments of historical records, personal accounts, and official documents, remains one of the most disturbing. What was she? A child with an unprecedented medical condition? A cruel experiment conducted by the Whitakers? Or something else entirely? The answers burned along with the Whitaker house on that cold March night in 1847. But perhaps not everything was lost in the fire. In 1958, a teacher at Baton Rouge Elementary School reported a strange incident that was documented in the school's administrative records. During a field trip to the old state capital, a girl of about 10 became separated from the group. When found by chaperones, she was examining a portrait of Baton Rouge in the 1840s. According to the teacher's report, when asked her name, she replied Ruth and smiled in a manner I found inappropriate. When I attempted to lead her back to the group, she said, "I lived there once, before it burned." The child then rejoined her classmates, and despite checking our attendance records, we were unable to identify which child had gone missing, as all students were accounted for. To this day, the former site of the Whitaker Plantation remains undeveloped. Local residents avoid the area, particularly at dusk, when some claim to have seen a small figure watching from the tree line. A child in old-fashioned dress, who never grows older and never comes closer, but simply watches, as if waiting for someone to recognize her. The questions remain, echoing through time. Who or what was Ruth Whitaker? What did the Whitakers discover or create in their remote Louisiana plantation? And most disturbing of all, if the remains of a child were never found in the ashes of the Whitaker home, where did Ruth go? Some mysteries are buried for a reason. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden in the dark waters of the past. But as long as records exist and memories persist, the story of the girl who never aged will continue to haunt the shadows of Louisiana history, a whisper that carries through time, defying both explanation and the natural order itself. End of narrative. Some mysteries are buried for a reason. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden in the dark waters of the past. But as long as records exist and memories persist, the story of the girl who never aged will continue to haunt the shadows of Louisiana history, a whisper that carries through time, defying both explanation and the natural order itself. The abandoned Whitaker property remained untouched for decades following the fire. In 1879, a New Orleans businessman named Charles Devereux purchased the land with intentions to establish a new sugar operation. According to parish records, construction began on a modern processing facility near the river, deliberately avoiding the former home site. Workers reported unusual occurrences, tools that disappeared only to reappear in different locations, unexplained cold spots even in summer heat, and most frequently, glimpses of a small figure watching from the edge of the woods. 3 months into construction, Devereux abandoned the project. His letter to investors, preserved in the Louisiana Business Historical Society archives, cited unforeseen complications with the property and local superstitions affecting worker reliability. He sold the land at a considerable loss and reportedly never returned to the Baton Rouge area. The land changed hands several more times over the following decades, but no development ever succeeded. By 1900, local maps labeled the area simply as Whitaker Hollow, a name that appears in no official record but was universally used by local residents. In 1922, an anthropologist from Tulane University named Dr. Martin Hebert developed an interest in the Whitaker case while researching regional folklore. His field notes, discovered after his death in 1967, document interviews with elderly residents whose parents and grandparents had lived near the Whitaker Plantation. Mrs. Augusta Thibodeau, age 87, whose father worked on a neighboring plantation, recounted, "Papa would not speak of the Whitaker girl, except after his third whiskey. He said she was old behind her eyes, that she would watch you like she was memorizing your face." The house slave said she had been with the family since before they came to Louisiana, though that cannot be right, as she was but a child. After the fire, when they found no child's remains, Papa said to Mama, "She's free now." But he didn't mean it like a soul going to heaven. He meant it like something escaping. Dr. Hebert's notes also reference a journal he discovered in the possession of Josephine Blanchard, whose grandmother had worked in the Whitaker household. Mrs. Blanchard permitted me to examine a small leather book she claims belonged to her grandmother. The journal contains what appear to be observations of the Whitaker child written by a house servant. Most entries are mundane, noting what the child ate, activities observed, words spoken. What makes the account remarkable are the dates, spanning from 1838 to 1847, describing a child who remained physically unchanged. The final entry, dated March 2, 1847, one day before the fatal fire, reads, "Miss Ruth refused dinner again, sat by the window looking toward the road all day. When I brought her tea at dusk, she turned to me and said, 'Thomas is gone, but he took what they needed. They'll come soon to see for themselves. You should leave tonight.'" Her voice was not a child's voice anymore. Dr. Hebert attempted to secure the journal for university archives, but Mrs. Blanchard refused to part with it. After her death in 1924, her family reported that the journal was missing from her personal effects. What happened to Dr. Hebert following his research provides another disturbing chapter in the Whitaker mystery. In November 1922, Hebert wrote to a colleague at Harvard, "I have uncovered documents suggesting the Whitakers corresponded extensively with a scientific society in Boston prior to their move to Louisiana. Most intriguing is a letter from Eleanor Whitaker to her sister in Massachusetts, dated 1827, mentioning the extraordinary child we have been entrusted with, and their plans to remove to a more private setting where the research can continue undisturbed. I depart tomorrow for Boston to investigate these connections further." Hebert's research notes from Boston, December 1922, contain a significant discovery. Archives of the New England Society for Medical Advancement yielded correspondence between Bradford Whitaker and society members between 1824 and 1827. Their interest appears to have centered around theories of cellular regeneration and the possibility of extended human lifespan. Whitaker, apparently a founding member, wrote extensively about experiments with a female child referred to only as Subject R. The Society minutes from January 1827 include a motion to discontinue the unnatural experiments upon the child and release her to proper authorities. The motion was defeated by one vote, with Whitaker casting the deciding ballot. The Society disbanded 3 months later. Most troubling was my discovery of a daguerreotype dated 1826, showing Society members. In the background stands a small female child who, despite the image's poor quality, bears striking resemblance to descriptions of Ruth Whitaker. If accurate, this would place the child in Boston at least 2 years before the Whitakers relocated to Louisiana. Hebert's final research entry, dated December 23, 1922, reads, "I visited Harvard Medical School's archived specimens today, requesting access to any materials associated with Bradford Whitaker or the New England Society. The archivist located a sealed container with Whitaker's name, unopened since received in 1848. Inside was a jar containing what appeared to be a tissue sample preserved in solution, and a note reading simply, 'Confirming your suspicions, the child is not human as we understand humanity. Perhaps not a child at all. God forgive us for what we've awakened. S.C. The archivist permitted me to extract a minute sample for modern analysis. I depart for New Orleans tomorrow with the specimen.' Dr. Hebert never returned to New Orleans. Boston police records show he boarded his scheduled train on December 24th, but he was not among the passengers when it arrived at its destination. His luggage was found in his compartment, including all his research materials, except the specimen and his most recent notes. The official investigation concluded he likely disembarked at an unscheduled stop. Despite extensive inquiries, no trace of Dr. Hebert was ever found. Interest in the Whitaker case faded until 1948, when construction of a new highway near Baton Rouge required surveying part of the former plantation property. According to the East Baton Rouge Parish Engineering Department records, workers excavating near the old foundation discovered a small underground chamber that had survived the 1847 fire. The space contained several items, including a child's dress, preserved books, and a collection of glass plates, early photographic negatives, showing what appeared to be microscopic studies of tissue samples. Dr. Walter Freeman of Louisiana State University was called to examine the findings. His report states, "The photographic plates show cellular structures unlike any I have encountered in 25 years of pathological research. The cells appear human in basic structure, but contain numerous abnormalities, particularly in the mitochondrial regions. Most striking is evidence of cellular division patterns that suggest extraordinary regenerative capabilities. Without the actual tissue samples, it is impossible to verify the authenticity of these images. However, if genuine, they depict a cellular structure that would theoretically be capable of continuous regeneration, effectively biological immortality." The artifacts were transferred to LSU for further study, but university records show they were never formally accessioned into any department's collections. When Dr. Freeman inquired about them in 1953, the university administration informed him the items had been transferred to appropriate federal authorities with no further explanation. In 1959, an unusual incident occurred that briefly revived public interest in the Whitaker mystery. During renovation of an antebellum home in Baton Rouge's Garden District, workers discovered a hidden compartment in the attic containing a journal dated 1853. The journal belonged to Sheriff Thomas Beauregard, who had investigated the Whitaker plantation shortly before the fatal fire. The Baton Rouge Advocate published excerpts. "I have carried the burden of silence regarding the Whitaker affair for 6 years, but as I feel my health failing, I must commit the truth to paper. What we found at the plantation that day was an abomination against nature. The child they called Ruth was no child at all. Whitaker showed me records dating back to 1791, a full 56 years, showing the same measurements, the same appearance, the same child who never aged. He claimed she had been found during an archaeological excavation in Massachusetts, sealed in a chamber beneath a native burial site that predated European settlement. The chamber walls, he said, bore symbols from no known civilization. Most disturbing was my brief interaction with the child herself. When Whitaker permitted me to speak with her, she addressed me by my given name, which I had not provided. She spoke in a voice that alternated between childish simplicity and disturbing maturity. When I asked her age, she smiled and replied, "I was already ancient when the first men reached these shores." I departed immediately thereafter and ordered Deputy Hargrove to speak of it to no one. 3 days later, the fire consumed the Whitaker home. I led the recovery effort personally, ensuring that certain discoveries remained unrecorded. We found the remains of the Whitakers and their servants. We did not find remains of a child. In the ashes of the annex, however, we discovered a tunnel leading away from the property toward the river. It appeared recently used. I ordered it collapsed and sealed immediately. I have spent years watching for signs of the child's reappearance. I believe she is still among us, unchanging, waiting. May God have mercy on us all. Following publication of the journal excerpts, the advocate received dozens of letters claiming sightings of a strange child, matching Ruth's description throughout Baton Rouge history. Most were dismissed as hysteria or hoaxes, but several came from reputable citizens with no apparent motive for deception. In 1963, during the height of Cold War tensions, the former Whitaker property was quietly purchased by a corporation later identified as a front for government research interests. Armed guards secured the perimeter while excavation equipment operated day and night for nearly 3 months. Local inquiry was discouraged through official channels. When operations ceased, the property was abandoned once again, with no explanation provided for the activities conducted there. A Freedom of Information Act request, filed in 1989, yielded heavily redacted documents confirming that the U.S. government had conducted an operation codenamed Longevity Prime at the site. The only unredacted section stated, "Samples recovered match those documented in Harvard Medical Archive, designation WR 1847. Cellular structure confirms previous analysis. Subject remains unlocated. Recommend continued monitoring of regional reports matching established profile. The most recent documented incident connected to the Whitaker case occurred in September 1968. A family traveling through Louisiana reported picking up a young girl walking alone on Highway 30 outside Baton Rouge during a rainstorm. According to their statement to local police, the child, approximately 10 years old, wore unusual clothing, like an old-fashioned nightgown, and spoke with an odd, formal manner of speech. The family's statement continues, "She told us her name was Ruth and that she was trying to reach New Orleans. When we asked about her parents, she said, 'They died long ago in the fire, but they weren't really my parents.' We decided to take her to the nearest police station, but when we stopped for gas in Gonzales, she was no longer in the car. We never saw her exit the vehicle, which we found deeply unsettling. Our daughter's coat, which we had given to the child because she was wet from the rain, was left on the seat, completely dry." Local authorities dismissed the report as either fabrication or misidentification of a runaway. The case was closed after minimal investigation. However, the attending officer made a personal note in his journal, discovered after his death in 1996. The description matches exactly the stories my grandfather told of the Whitaker child. Same age, same appearance, same unnerving manner. When I was assigned the case, I felt a chill I cannot explain. Some things in this world are beyond our understanding and perhaps beyond our right to know. The Whitaker Plantation site remains undeveloped to this day, a large tract of overgrown land surrounded by modern development. Local residents still avoid the area, particularly after sunset. Parents in nearby communities warn children not to venture onto Whitaker land, though few could explain exactly what they fear might happen there. In 200 years of Louisiana history, the mystery of Ruth Whitaker represents a disturbing footnote, a convergence of science, superstition, and the unknown. What evidence remains has been scattered, suppressed, or lost to time. The historical record offers fragments that suggest something existed outside our understanding of natural law. A child who never aged, whose cells regenerated with impossible perfection, who may have carried knowledge spanning centuries. If the accounts are accurate, Ruth Whitaker, if that was ever her true name, would be over 230 years old today. And if the pattern suggested by historical sightings continues, she would still appear as a 10-year-old girl. The logical mind dismisses such possibilities as folklore, misidentification, or deliberate hoax. Scientific understanding rejects the concept of cellular immortality in complex organisms. Yet the fragmentary evidence, the consistent descriptions across decades, the missing scientific specimens, the government's unexplained interest in an abandoned plantation suggests something beyond conventional explanation. Perhaps most unsettling is the final entry in Dr. Hebbert's recovered notes, written during his train journey in December 1922, the last words he recorded before his disappearance. I awoke in my compartment to find a child sitting opposite me, a girl of about 10 with dark hair and eyes that reflected the compartment lights oddly. She wore modern children's clothing, but her posture and manner were unmistakably adult. "You've been asking questions about me, Dr. Hebbert," she said. "They always send someone, every generation or so. It keeps happening because you never learn." When I asked what she meant, she smiled, the same smile described by witnesses across a century of accounts, and said, "That some of us were here before you, and will remain long after. We change our names, our appearances, our stories, but we endure." She reached for my specimen case, and though I tried to prevent her, my limbs felt suddenly leaden. "This belongs to me," she said, taking the tissue sample, "a small piece, but still mine." As consciousness began to fade, I heard her final words. "Sleep now, Doctor. When you wake, you'll be somewhere else. You'll have a new purpose." I feel myself drifting again as I write these words. There is a station approaching. I do not recognize the landscape beyond the window. Passengers who shared Heber's train car reported that he seemed to be alone throughout the journey. No child matching his description was observed by train personnel or fellow travelers. Yet his luggage remained, his body was never found, and the mystery he investigated continues to echo through the swamps and shadows of Louisiana history. Across the decades, reports persist. A child who appears briefly and vanishes, a girl who knows things she couldn't possibly know, a small figure watching from the periphery of our world. The documented history ends, but the legend continues, passed down through generations in hushed voices. The girl who never aged, who survived fire and time, who waits in the shadows of history for reasons known only to herself. Is Ruth Whitaker still out there, unchanging while the world transforms around her? Does she still watch from the edges of our perception, a living relic of scientific ambition that crossed boundaries never meant to be traversed? We may never know. Perhaps that too is by design. For those who travel Highway 30 east of Baton Rouge, particularly on rainy nights, locals still offer the same advice. If you see a small girl walking alone along the roadside, keep driving. Some stories are best left unfinished. Some mysteries are safer left unsolved. This has been the documented case of Ruth Whitaker, the girl who never aged, a whisper from Louisiana's dark history that continues to defy explanation, science, and the natural order itself.